Good morning or evening again, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris Smith, and as part of the requirements for George Washington University's capstone project, it is my pleasure to be briefing you this evening on an update concerning our situation. This is specifically targeted towards the mayor's office, the police chief, the fire department, public officials, and Department of Transportation employees. Ladies and gentlemen, we are currently in a state of emergency. This is the worst storm on record to hit our state, and its effects have been devastating. There is some good news, however. Freezing rain has stopped. However, we have roughly 8 inches of ice in most areas. The weather forecast predicts there will be a lull in the storm, and we can see it shortening in terms of ice accumulation. However, the extended forecast predicts that up to a week from now, we could see temperatures drop down to the low teens, roughly 15 degrees, which would significantly impact our recovery operations that are currently ongoing. So, with that being said, we need to take the initiative now. Now is the time to attack this storm head on. While the milder temperatures that are roughly in the 30-degree mark aid our salt and chemical applications and allow us to clear some of these roads and address some of our power issues. Which let me go ahead and address that while I can. We are facing several miles of down power lines. There is no estimated timeline for return to full capacity. It may take several months for us to see a return to normalcy in the infrastructure we have as far as the grid is concerned. Contributing to this problem is Velco's inability to reach work areas due to this 8 inches of ice that has made getting to these areas next to impossible. Contributing to this is also downed trees that is making it very hard for these workers to get into these areas. They're also facing their own logistics challenges and personnel challenges. Talking to their CEO, they need workforce support. They need items that are going to replace existing ones, and these items may have to come from as far as Arizona and perhaps even Texas. And as I mentioned, in looking at trying to restore power, there is no timeline for that. We don't know what that's going to look like. And as I mentioned, something that's contributing to that factor is that they can't get to these areas. And the Department of Transportation has come out and said all primary and secondary roads remain inoperable. We are roughly sitting at 95% closure rate along our roads. Our efforts of laying salt, sand, and grit to aid in mobility have largely been hindered because of the rapid pace of the storm and the temperatures of the storm. Now, we will, as I mentioned earlier, have a break in this storm for the next week in which some of that salt and some of that chemical application may take effect and increase our mobility, but our resources are quickly dwindling. We also face another challenge in our lines of communication, and that is bridges and buildings will need special teams to break the ice. I mentioned buildings because we run a risk of structural collapse, which could block many of our primary and secondary roads. Now, while we talk about formulating these special teams and personal issues, and I have mentioned that we are facing some shortfall in our salt application, our sand application, and chemical applications, our budget for plowing is rapidly decreasing for both the public and private sectors. Salt, sand, and grit, where we started at the beginning of the storm, are rapidly being diminished as well. And we may face needing to outsource these, both in terms of within state from cities farther away that haven't been as hard hit as we have, or perhaps even out of state, maybe even from the private sector, or asking the federal government to provide it for us. Which leads me to a next point. FEMA right now is organizing funding and resources. This will aid us with our critical shortfalls that I have mentioned, specifically the budget items and the salt and the grit. I believe that we can get those identified early on and begin the process of requesting them. Now, another issue that we may want to tackle is private and nonprofit organizations on a cost-sharing business basis with FEMA. The governor has come out and said that urban areas are his main effort, his primary concern, and that shelters would need to be made available to those rural areas. Now, there is a primary challenge with this that we need to go ahead and identify and make known. As I mentioned, we need special teams to go and break the ice on bridges and to clear roads and then to break ice off of buildings. So if we identify a shelter, we need to make sure that that is a priority and it is works alongside with our current plan of de-icing and making the metropolitan and the urban areas a priority. So these are areas in which we're going to need to have a discussion about, and I default to the mayor, who is going to have to make that decision on what buildings are going to serve as shelters and how we're going to formulate a special team that's going to go out there and make sure that building is safe for these people in the rural areas to come to. Also, Mr. Albert Lewis is serving as the FEMA officer and the point of contact. He has been given the authority to mobilize all resources he deems necessary in responding to the storm and reducing its impact. And so currently, what we're going to look to do is draft an emergency mutual assistance agreement. Now, there are several steps in this process, and we are very much in its infancy. What has to happen first, and which has already happened, is both the governor and the federal government have agreed that our state is currently in a state of emergency. That aids us. What we're doing now is currently assessing our needs for resources. Once we have done that, we're going to need to determine who can fill those needs, whether that be we can find them in state, can a sister state do it, and then if neither of those, we may need to look at the federal government or the private sector and see who can aid us faster in reducing the impact of the storm. That's where we're currently at right now with the Emergency Mutual Assistance Agreement. As time continues to go on, I will continue to update you as we get closer to drafting that, reviewing it, finalizing it, and then disseminating it out to all department heads. This concludes your update. At this time, do I have any questions?